Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in once again. It's David Summers hosting another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. This is the story of wrestling in America, as told by the Stud, whose family started the profession over 100 years ago. Let's step back into the ring, back into time, as we get wall to wall and treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Hey Ron, I gotta tell you, you really shook up the wrestling world in the last Studcast, talking about and telling how Vince McMahon Jr. in 1989, to save a little money and avoid the Boxing and Wrestling Commission taxes on each live event across America, Vince chose to say the sport was not real and was scripted, and he did it all under oath.
I did get quite a response, didn't I, Dave? Wow, my social media is blown up, man. I'm telling you. So,
I would say so, Stud. Listen, enough to break your all-time Studcast record for listeners in the first week. So I can't imagine where you're going this week.
Well, this subject, man, all started weeks ago about the Boxing and Wrestling Commission. That's where all this began. It didn't start with Vince, actually, and it's because the commissions were all across America, and we were talking about how they were created and how they were destroyed. And my grandfather Roy created one of the first of these boxing and wrestling commissions in 1935 in Tennessee. So we've been talking about them and the new hidden history lessons that we're doing now in each of these Studcasts. And actually, we've done 4 episodes now, 4 weeks worth of these. And it has been a really, really phenomenal response that we've been getting from it. The last Studcast, it basically exploded, man, when we focused on much more than just how Vince Jr. decided to handle the additional state commission tax in New Jersey. That's basically what the subject was last week. It went far beyond his to his wife's and to a certain head employee in the company getting before the court and admitting that wrestling wasn't real and entirely scripted, and to avoid any additional tax in many states, obviously across America, on his live events. So Vince, basically he wanted to get away from that tax big time, and I can't understand it because he was making some big money. Why he wanted to do that and how it affected him is pretty dramatic.
Wow. All right, you definitely took it to another level, Stud. You made an extremely persuasive argument that McMahon's admission of the fact wrestling was not real was a possible turning point in the sport's history itself, and then you proved it. You proved it in a ton of ways.
Well, the response to that proof, Dave, has blown up. I think that's what's blown up the internet for me and the number of fans. I now have around the world a lot more fans than I had during the last couple of Studcasts we've been doing. So Vince McMahon has always been a controversial character in the sport. But what is happening now with him is so salacious that I don't even want to talk about that at all.
All right, I don't blame you, Ron. I'm not surprised that you would not touch what the world is saying today about Vince McMahon Jr. I thought your proof last Studcast about a false Google statement, in particular saying after Vince admitted wrestling was scripted, fans didn't care. And the sport was more popular now than it had ever been even before that announcement.
Yeah, I'd intended to stick with the Boxing and Wrestling Commission incident concerning Vince, but during my research, I discovered, something much more interesting and something that was totally incorrect. This Google statement that wrestling's more popular than ever since Vince came along. So I finished my goal basically of presenting how McMahon Jr. exposed wrestling purposely, saying it was scripted to line his greedy pockets, basically, and to get some extra money off his live events by avoiding having to pay that state athletic commission tax, because after his admission, wrestling was no longer considered a legitimate sport. So I think he underestimated the impact of that statement. Actually, I know he did, because wrestling has never been the same again. Admitting it wasn't real killed wrestling for most of the long-time fans worldwide, and they were never going to come back. And I also know, because my social media sites went crazy after the last Studcast, that we hit all-time record numbers, and that we're not going to talk about the subject I was going to do today on the relationship between wrestling and carnivals. I said last week we're going to do wrestling and carnivals this week with my grandfather Roy, but because of the way my internet is blown up, we're going to get into we're going to go back to McMahon here at least one more time. And we'll get to that new topic, wrestling and carnivals, and how all that started back in the 1800s, late 1800s. So this Studcast, we're going to continue on the fact that McMahon Jr.'s admission of wrestling being scripted rather than real, not only did it make the sport bigger than ever, as claimed by Google, right? That was their claim. But quite to the contrary, it made it much smaller than before Vince McMahon took over professional wrestling. Did a little bit toward proving that last week. We're going to get into it big time this one.
Well, it sure seems like it. Obviously, this is going to be another very interesting Studcast, besides a follow-up on whether wrestling was bigger before Vince Jr. killed the territories. So we're going to find out about all that. But where else are we going to ride today, Stud?
Well, given the time, we're going to cover the huge one-night tournament, Mobile, Alabama's main auditorium, on February the 19th, 1980. And we're going to see who is going to be meeting the legendary Harley Race for a shot at the 10 pounds of gold, the NWA World Championship belt. And we'll also break down the TV for the card, the results of the matches, and the attendances in all three major Southeastern markets. And if we got enough time, we're going to do a learning tree.
All right, good deal. So knowing you, I think we're about to have some fun, Ron. Where are you going to start to end your look at the size of the TV audiences and the arena attendances before and after Vince Jr. said the sport was scripted and before he completely took over what we now call or knew as professional wrestling?
Well, I'm going to do this because of the responses I got, obviously, from so many dedicated fans who produce facts, a couple of them that further prove what I said last week is definitely correct, but not only correct, but maybe not as much as I said it was. So the following, Dave, is just one sample of how one fan felt about what I had to say in the last Studcast. This came from a Facebook fan. His name is Jim Harder. Jim says, Ron, I agree with you 100%. I'm 60 years old and grew up in the Chicago area. A promoter named Bob Luce worked with both Vern Gagne of the AWA in Minneapolis and Dick Afflis in Indianapolis to hold huge wrestling cards in Chicago during the warmer months at Kaminsky Park and Soldier Field that drew 30,000 or more people. They also had cards at the International Amphitheater that sold out the houses. They had wrestling shows on channels 26 and 44. Despite both being UHF stations, thousands and thousands watched. Even the media critics, who pretended not to like wrestling, knew who Vern Gagne, Dick the Bruiser, the Crusher, Bobby Heenan, Blackjack Lanza, Nick Bockwinkel, Ray Stevens, Mad Dog Vachon, Blackjack Mulligan, and so many others were. So this gentleman says, I would venture to say at least 500,000 people out of a metropolitan area of 3 million watch wrestling at least occasionally, and if not each week. People loved it, obviously, from the kids to the old people. Many lost interest after that weirdo, this is his words now, Vince McMahon came in and basically used the bathroom on it, no pun intended, right? So this is further proof of the greater success of the sport before McMahon Jr. took over wrestling. So let's start with his TV figures. Based upon the facts that events were being held with the cooperation of 3 promoters, and one of them being Vern Gagne, tells me this time frame in which these 3 promoters were working together was probably between 1985 and 1987. I say that because Vern contacted me in 1987, and he set up a meeting with me and Jerry Jarrett in Minnesota. We both went to Minnesota, Jerry and I. We discussed some kind of partnership to fight McMahon Jr. That sounds very similar to the one Mr. Harder describing here in Chicago. So another thing Mr. Harder says that tells me this was somewhere between 1985 and 87 is the fact that Chicago, Indianapolis, and Gagne's AWA territory had formed a partnership to compete with Vince Jr. in Chicago. So Mr. Harder said they were using TV matches on 2 UHF TV stations, channel 26 and 44. That meant they were not on any of the 3 major networks, as McMahon was. I think he was on NBC at this point, or about to be there. I know he was there by 85 or by 87.
Yes.
But he was on the much smaller. This guy says they were still on the much smaller local UHF TV stations. Obviously, they had weak signals compared to the major networks, and probably they were the 4th or 5th TV stations in that market before cable TV got to be nationwide, which is going to happen in the late 80s anyway. So using Mr. Harder's numbers of 500,000 TV viewers watching wrestling each week out of a possible 3 million total viewers, based on my calculations last week, that would indicate that 6% of that market's total viewers were watching these 3 promoters' products, and that was just two UHF stations, the smallest of the TV stations in the market. My figures last week showed 8% watching the Continental Territory and 10 stations down south, but in order to be as realistic as possible, I lowered that number. When we computed this last week, we talked about this, how many people were watching it on TV as compared to watching now. So I dropped that 8% number that my territory was getting, thinking it was a little higher than the others would be, and I lowered that down to 4% against the actual 8 that we were doing. So if Chicago had just 2 UHF TV stations, they were getting 6% of that area's population watching wrestling each week. I definitely underestimated the actual number of people watching in the entire country. I'm not really familiar with Chicago. This gentleman is. So that 6% of the audience, the people that lived there, that were watching wrestling, that was more fans watching wrestling on TV, obviously, than the 4% I end up saying that was what they were going to be watching nationwide. So based upon the Chicago's 6% number and my Continental Territory of 8%, which we both know is actually happened, so I'm going to raise my calculation, and we're going to talk about this again this week, of the number of viewers across America in 1985 from 4%, like I had talked about last week, just 2% more to 6%, up to basically where Chicago was, but still below where I was in the South. And, that's all the people So we're going to say 6% of the people in America, across America, watching wrestling before Vince McMahon. So that's going to dramatically change this week's calculation of the total number of people watching wrestling across the country. Of the 238 million population in 1985 living in the country, at 4% watching, that was prediction last week. That would have said there were 9,520,000 total watching every week across America before Vince.
Wow.
Using that more likely figure now of 6%, that would bring that figure up to actually 14,280,000 watching TV wrestling every week.
Wow.
I don't doubt that probably happened. So compare that number to the 4,003,000 that was watching today's wrestling in the figure that I had last week. That came straight off of Google. You Google it, you can find out how many people were watching. And what we looked at last week is we took the last week in 2023, and they had total across the country 4,003,000 people watching. That means there were 10 million more fans watching TV in 1985 than the number that were watching in 2023.
That also means 10 million people walked away from wrestling after Vince did what he did.
Yeah.
Wow. That's unbelievable. I mean, without knowing that, you think, wow, 4 million, that's a lot of people. No, it's not. It's really not. Considering the local TV stations that served so many people across the nation were just skipped. The numbers were just absolutely taken away. So anyway, that's a huge number. 10 million more were watching wrestling every week in 1985 that are watching than are watching today. All right. Anything else on this subject, Stud? This has really been fascinating.
Well, yeah, man. We've looked at the TV numbers and the differences between 1985 and today's TV numbers. So let's find out about the attendance differences between the year 1985, before Vince McMahon Jr. killed the territories, and we're going to let's compare that to today's attendance numbers for the total number of tickets sold for all the operating companies, including the indies. And so I received more interesting information from another Facebook friend that had the information on this part of it. And he's a gentleman named William Arends, and he had discovered some new and correct statistics on today's wrestling attendances. And when you see how many people attended live wrestling shows on a weekly basis in the territory days as compared to the modern day, the difference is staggering. I mean, it's unbelievable. So Mr. Arends' numbers in 1985 were based upon some of my numbers. With 20 plus, I think we talked last week about 20 plus territories running 6 nights a week, he took those numbers of 20 territories running 6 nights a week, and even if you lowball the average attendance to say only 2,000 people were at each of those shows, and that's really lowballing it because a lot of those shows were 10,000. And very few of them were down in the 2,000 range. And if you multiply that 2,000 people at each one of those shows by 120 nationwide shows running weekly, that means that 240,000 tickets were sold weekly to wrestling in 1985. Now you take that 240 totally weekly attendance and multiply it by the 52 weeks of the year, and that is 12,480,000 total tickets sold per year in 1985.
Wow.
Now Mr. Renzi continued here, and he says, keep in mind, I used the very low end for my numbers. There were more territories than 20, and many ran 2 shows on Saturday and Sunday, and the bigger ones ran 2 cities every night. So it's very conceivable that the number of tickets sold annually could be closer to 20 million for the average wrestling attendance yearly during the territory era. So now let's compare the attendances for the wrestling companies in business in 2023. WWE sold 1.7 million, 1,700,000 tickets. AEW sold 500,000 tickets, and most of those were in England. Impact Wrestling sold 300,000 tickets, and indies, little small indie operations all across America, about 200,000. That means that in 2023, 2,700,000 tickets were sold by wrestling companies in America. In 1985, 12,480,000 tickets were sold before McMahon killed the territories. The bottom line, man, is basically, it's pretty simple. Bottom line is the territories sold 9,780,000 more tickets in 1985 than all the wrestling companies sold in 2023. So that's almost 10 million more tickets sold in 85 than was sold in 2023. And I'd like to thank Mr. Reams for your input here, because I wouldn't have had these figures, and I couldn't have said that without having these figures that are honest.
That's a terrific segment you just dropped on us. Thanks to that gentleman. I've been trying to keep up with these numbers compared to last week. Can you break down the huge difference in last week's TV numbers and the new ones today, and add the ticket sales difference that you didn't do last week?
Oh, yeah. You mean make it simple, Dave?
Yeah. Really simplify it.
What was the exact? So you want to know exactly the difference between 1985 before McMahon and 2023. What was going on, and I definitely can. Compared 1985 ticket sales to 2023 ticket sales, just said a second ago, there was a 9,780,000 more tickets sold in the territory days than in 2023. And with the TV audience, in the total TV audience, comparing 1985 to 2023, in 1985, 14,280,000 people watch wrestling weekly. In 2023, 4,003,000 watched in the last week of 2023, and that's basically what their figures were. There might have been a million more some weeks, but it's so in that 38-year period from 1985 to 2023, today's wrestling TV audience has dropped 10 million customers, 10,173,000 fans. What you said basically a minute ago, Dave. Almost 10 million more tickets were sold in 1985 than they sold last year.
Wow.
2023.
Wow.
Almost 10 million fans watching wrestling on TV disappeared between 1985 and 2023.
God.
That makes it crystal clear, I think, that Vince McMahon Jr. has failed to improve anything about the sport. I mean, he's messed up all the other parts of it, but obviously he's messed this part of it too. And if you think these numbers aren't bad enough, take into consideration, Dave, that the country grew during these years from 1985 to 2023 by close to 100 million people.
Population-wise, yeah. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, population-wise.
Wow.
So he lost 10 million TV viewers while the country grew by 100 million people.
God. I tell you what, that's really fascinating, and it's weird to think about those kind of numbers. People who don't know have no idea what was taken away from these small markets over the years, and how Vince really just reduced the size of the funnel down to almost nothing and took it all for himself as he just pillaged all of the TV markets that were once just terrific, just fantastic, and stood on their own and made local people lots of money. A really fantastic job, Stud, of finding the numbers to prove even Google can be wrong. All right, we're close enough. Let's get a break in. Let's do that. And when we return after the break, we'll go to mid-February 1980 with a huge tournament. We're going to see who's getting the shot. I love when we're talking about the King Harley race and the NWA Championship. That is coming up after the break, when this Studcast continues. Hey, everybody, David Summers again, and Ron wants me to thank everybody who contacted him on his social media sites about the recent Studcast that mentioned Vince McMahon Jr. He's been inundated by responses and apologies to all he has not been able to respond to, as he usually does. Ron very much appreciates all your comments and all of your support. You're making his Studcast even bigger than it's ever been. After more than 6 years and 338 episodes. Without your wonderful support, there would be no Studcast. Thanks, everybody. All right, welcome back. It's another tremendous ride in the first part of this Studcast, Ron. You are single-handedly proving that even Google has some facts incorrect when it comes to professional wrestling. So, as we get into the second half of this Studcast, where are we riding from here?
Well, we're going to talk, man, about the big card in Mobile, Alabama, in that main arena. Beautiful, beautiful facility. For the second week in a row, this is going to be our second week in a row in that building. And the night was February 19th, 1980, a Tuesday night. The main arena was almost full last week. We had 9,100 fans in that 10,000-seat arena. And the week before to see two cage matches and a really good card below that. This time the card was completely different. It was going to set up a rare appearance from the NWA World Champion Harley Race, which is true. We rarely got Harley, and as we continued to grow and get better down there in that territory, we got more and more dates on Harley and on Flair when Flair became champion. So this card was going to find the champion's challenger for the belt the following week. Harley's coming to town. Who's going to wrestle him? That's the whole question. Mm-hmm. So this event was a one-night tournament, had 12 men in it, going to have 11 total matches to find out who's going to get there and who's going to be the champion, meet the champion.
Wow, this is going to be great. I love those one-night tournaments. So who was wrestling who in this one, Stud?
Well, the first tournament match was the Big C versus Charlie Cook. Charlie Cook had just come back. Big C had only been there about 3 weeks, actually. So both of these guys are fairly new. But Charlie Cook was a big star there. Big C's a mascot. Second match was former NWA World Champion Lou Thesz, taking on the United States Junior Heavyweight Champion Tony Charles. Third match was Eddie Boulder against Randy Rose. Fourth match was my brother Robert facing Norvell Austin. The fifth match was me against Jimmy Golden. And the sixth and final first round match was Joe Leduc fighting the Southeastern champion Mongolian Stomper managed by Don Carson. And I say fighting because that's what they always did, man. And that's all they seemed to want to do with each other was to fight and see who could get the bloodiest. So 11 matches in all, and the last man standing is going to get the shot at the NWA title Harley Race.
Wow. The match that caught my eye on this card was Tony Charles and Lou Thesz. Hard to imagine that one. All right, so how about the TV to promote and set up a big card like this?
Well, this TV opened up with Charlie Platt, welcoming everyone, saying that this week's championship match on TV, because this was February and we were doing a championship match on television every week to try to bump those ratings as much as we could, that this week's championship match on TV was going to be for the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship. And that meant the champion Tony Charles was going to be defending right there on TV. And he said that this is going to be the first match of the day. Well, the studio, they loved that. They popped on that right away. So then he followed up with an announcement about the upcoming Southeastern one-night tournament, Mobile, Alabama. We talked about it in the general portion of the program because we felt like that we could bring in people from Dothan and from Montgomery as well, all of the areas, because this was the only place it was going to happen. It's going to be one championship title defense. And, we intentionally, when I talked to Charlie and set this up to open the show, I wanted to let everybody know that there's a big match coming in Mobile. So then the Mobile, and he added for that reason, because the tournament was going to be all single matches, obviously, because there's just going to be one guy, Russell Hartley, that's for sure. And to get that championship match, that he would be during this program, they were going to see all single matches today. And to get things started off, he said, I have a special guest that's going to join me for this first match. And then he introduced the former and the first ever NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Lou Thesz. And Lou got an even bigger pop than the opening two pops. And Lou looked great. I mean, he was in tremendous shape still at this point. I don't know what his age was.
I was going to ask. Wow.
But I'll tell you, give you an idea. When he won that first NWA World Championship crown, that was in 1948.
Okay.
Okay, we're in 1980.
Oh, my God.
Okay, and he is still in great shape. And so the studio crowd, they greeted him, man, as if he was still the world champion. I mean, they were like, wow, impressed. He looked unbelievable. Mm-hmm. So and Charlie and Lou had a brief conversation in which Charlie kind of informed all of them watching that Lou wasn't just there to help with the TV commentary, that he was actually in the tournament. And so that got another big hand. I mean, I'm sure the fans were they were blown away like I was. I mean, how can he still do it, right? So they got another big hand, and then the bell rang for the first match.
Wow.
So Tony Charles, when he popped out of the dressing room door, wearing his United States Junior Heavyweight Championship belt and headed to the ring, wow, it was another big pop from the crowd. I mean, we've got 3 or 4 pops, and we're probably 3 minutes into the show.
Wow. I remember seeing Lou Thesz, and I was a young guy, and I thought, okay, wow, this guy really is a legend. And as a kid, I remember seeing it. Then when I was a little older, I remember seeing Lou Thesz, who still looked fantastic, and he just had an aura and appeal about him that everybody thought, yeah, that guy's a champion. Well, we all knew he had been a champion, and he still looked like one. So guessing the age, it just doesn't matter, Ron. So I think that's pretty amazing. Just having a legend like that around, and you wrestled him, no telling how many times. Okay, back to Tony. Who was Tony wrestling?
Well, we wanted these TV championship matches to be really, really good. You can't boost your ratings if you don't have top-notch stuff. So Rob and I, man, we were both watching this. Tony went to the ring. He's there. He don't know who he's wrestling at this point. And we both smiled because Randy Rose came out of the dressing room. Randy Rose, he had been wrestling that week. In fact, 4 days earlier, had a really nasty match with Randy Rose. And the camera was on Tony, and you got a smile on Tony's face. He was happy to see him. Like, wow, I get my hands on him again. And they had, like I said, a really nasty match 4 days earlier in Mobile. And then that one, Rose got disqualified. So Lou was extremely familiar with Tony Charles. I was amazed at how much Lou knew about Tony Charles, because Lou wrestled all over the world. He wasn't just a star in America. He was a star in Europe. He was a star in Australia, in Japan. He went everywhere. And so, so he let everybody know that he had the utmost respect for Tony Charles, and that he had known him for more than 20 years. I never knew that, man. And he said, he said, I wrestled in Europe, 30 times in my life, right? So and Tony Charles was a huge star in Europe. So it wasn't far into the match then that Mr. Thesz began to get some respect, though, for this young Randy Rose. He watched a little bit of it, and then, and Tony had this way of wrestling in which he kind of mesmerized the people watching. He had all these tosses and these different forms of moves that they'd never seen before, but the match ended, this match went 20 minutes. That was a time limit draw. It was for the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship. There wasn't a winner. It ended up a draw. And as Lou was leaving the set, Charlie invited him. He said, why don't you join me later for the personality profile? Which I thought was a great idea. I mean, wow, what better? You got an opportunity to talk to one of the greatest of all time. So that was a nice deal.
Oh, no doubt. Pretty cool. All right, so who was in the second match?
Jimmy Golden with Norvell standing at ringside. And Robert and I joined Charlie because I'm going to end up wrestling Jimmy Golden in the tournament. Robert's going to end up wrestling Norvell Austin in the tournament. So these two were our first round opponents in the tournament. But we didn't get much time basically to talk about any of this because, Jimmy went so loud. Wow, he was crazy, man. I mean, he beat this guy unmercifully. And, he was ready. I mean, and obviously so was Norvell. Everybody got primed for these type of tournaments. Not just the fans love these tournaments, but the wrestlers love these type of tournaments as well. So Lou then joined Charlie. Next up was the personality profile, and Lou sat down with Charlie Platt, and they had a very interesting conversation about Lou. They talked basically a little about his age, and that the fact that I think Charlie asked him, one of the questions was, Lou, why did you want to be in this tournament, right? So he told Charlie that it was because he wanted to get one last shot at that NWA world title belt. And he says, especially now, he says, if you've seen it, it's 10 pounds of gold. It's the most beautiful belt ever. And that wasn't that wasn't an over-the-top statement. I mean, it was truly the one, I think, the most beautiful wrestling belt ever. So, Lou says, I don't think I'm finished, Charlie. I think I've still got some matches left in me. So toward the end of the personality profile, and everybody in those stands and the bleachers there next to it, they were just dead silent. They were so into this interview. To hear from this guy is truly an amazing thing. And but then out comes Jimmy Golden, Norvell Austin, and Randy Rose. Come right over to the set from their dressing room on the far side of the studio, and they interrupt the conversation. And Jimmy, and I think Jimmy, and I believe it was Norvell said some of it, they made some remarks right directly to Lou's face about how old he was and him being an over-the-hill wrestler. so me and Rob are back in the dressing room, and I'm like, oh, my God, I don't know what's going to happen here. I mean, Lou's liable to take care of all three of them back there, And I can't have that happen, right? So I say to Rob, we got to go, man. Let's go over there. So we went over and kind of, backed those guys off, because I thought, man, we can't have Lou get it. Either he's going to embarrass these guys or he's going to embarrass us, right? so it was kind of an odd situation, but wow, once me and Rob got there, and then, there stands Golden and Norvell and Randy Rose, who was a real cocky guy.
Yeah.
He was always had a lot of heat, but at this point, he's really becoming a strong heel in the territory. And, there they stand, kind of looking down at Lou. He's still sitting down. Well, by the time we got there, he was standing up. I was like, I stood in front of him like, whoa, let's don't go any further than that. But people on the bleachers, they lit up. I was like, oh, gosh, what's going to happen here? Kind of like me. I had the same question in my mind. So then the next match on the card was the Masked Big C's. It was his second match on TV. And Charlie Cook, was going to be his opponent in the tournament. So Charlie Cook, he was in the first round, going to be in the first round of Big C. He went to sit with Charlie, to join Charlie and make some comments about the Big C. And he wasn't there very long because the Big C, he kind of took care of business pretty quick too, man. And the thing that impressed me about his match, the Big C, is he won this one. He didn't use any black glove. He didn't need the black glove. He dominated he had a young guy, and he dominated him and really took advantage of him more than dominating him. That he took advantage of this kid. So then the last match was with Joe Leduc, who was really over at this time, man. I mean, he was really on fire in the territory. Don Carson, the Mongolian Stomper, they were supposed to go to the set, but they didn't go to the set to be with Charlie. They went to the side of the ring and stood there while Joe wrestled them. And basically they wanted to try to distract him, maybe intimidate him a little bit or whatever, But you didn't intimidate Joe Leduc very easily. That wasn't going to work, So, and he let him know. He looked at him during the course of the match that he's having, and he played with the guy he had because he was going to beat him whenever he got ready, and he kind of enjoyed jawing with the Stomper and then with Carson there. Mm-hmm. So basically, he didn't mind that they were at ringside, and he and the Stomper, they had. I don't know how to put this in any other way, but they had basically tasted each other's blood, man, for the last 7 weeks. Every match they had in 7 weeks had blood in it. They had bled more. My gosh, I don't know how much blood they lost.
Wow.
This to me, this period, this 7-week period here, and I'm talking about, they've been there together 7 weeks in a row. I think it was one of the bloodiest feuds in the sport's history. If there's a way of gauging how much blood was lost, I think that would be one of the biggest in history. So Leduc, at the end of it, he got ready to finish his guy, and he bear hugged him, man, and beat him with the bear hug. But while he had him in the bear hug, he walked him over to where Stomper and Carson were standing, and you could hear him really loud. He goes, you guys want some? Come on. And the guy's screaming, oh, he's giving up, and the referee's not paying any attention. He's trying to keep something else from happening. So.
Wow.
So it was a pretty interesting little match.
In a bloody feud like that, I wonder if you can gauge also how it dominated. Did it dominate the TV ratings? And I bet it did. Another great TV, no doubt. What were the results of the matches in the tournament? And let's find out who won the shot at Harley Race 1 week after the tournament.
Well, in case whether maybe we're running short a little time. I'm going to be kind of brief, but the tournament was absolutely a tremendous, amazing tournament, and it had a lot of strange things that happened in it. And it seemed like when you had these one-night tournaments, that was always the case. Somebody's going to get beat in a strange way. There's going to be some outside interference from somebody else, and this one, man, it was no exception. One of his examples was Randy Rose, who had wrestled the Tuesday before against Tony Charles for the U.S. Junior Championship. He went down, and Charles in this match was wrestling Lou Thesz, okay? And Charles is about to beat Lou, and Randy Rose goes down and interferes in the match and causes Tony to lose the match. So then Rose goes out, and in his match, he ends up, Tony Charles returns the favor. The very next match is Rose, and Charles goes down in Rose's match, and he gets Rose eliminated from the tournament. And then later on, both Leduc and the Stomper got disqualified. They were wrestling against each other first round. They did their normal thing. The war was on, man. It didn't make any difference whether anybody's going to get a championship match or not. They didn't care. It's who's going to bleed the most here. And they went at it like usual, and both got disqualified. So bottom line, the finals was me against Lou Thesz, and Lou had worked his way. Actually, he didn't have to beat Tony because Rose got involved. But Lou ended up in the finals with me, and I wrestled Lou. I'd wrestled Lou 4 times in my career at that point.
Wow. Okay.
And I'd never beat Lou, and in 2 of those matches, Lou didn't beat me, So on this night, I was extremely lucky, man. I caught him not expecting it. I don't know that he had seen a lot of my matches, but he went for a slam, and I dropped down behind him, and I was able to hook my fuller leg lock on him. Wow. And I know he didn't know that hold. But he knew it as soon as I hooked it that, wow, hey, I got to give this one up. I'm going to get hurt. So, I end up winning the match using the fuller leg lock.
Wow. So you wrestled.
And going into the next week against Harley.
So you earned that match. So you wrestled Lou 4 times in your career, and the first 3 times he won.
Yeah.
All right.
He won. Oh, yeah. I mean, gosh, no. But one of the to my defense here, basically, for not ever beating Lou except for this match, was 2 of those matches were my first year.
Well, I was going to say you were practically still a kid when you were wrestling Lou Thesz of all former heroes or stars at the time.
Yeah, I mean, my first 2 matches with Lou, I was only 22 years old.
Yeah, right.
So, you ain't going to beat Lou Thesz at 22
What's your problem, stud? Come on.
Oh, man, I mean, you're asking a lot, man. You can beat a lot of guys maybe at 22, but not that guy.
So how long after, how old were you when you got this win?
Oh, geez, let's see. This was in 1980. I was
30.
Yeah, 30 years old. Wait a minute. 40. I would say 22 years old.
You were
32 years old.
32. Okay.
32 years.
I knew for a long time a lot of things were happening. You were 29 years old. So still a young man in the business, I guess you could say, when you finally got the win over Lou Thesz. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I had learned a whole lot in the past 3 years. It had probably been at least 6 years since I had wrestled Lou. Wow. And I hadn't seen Lou a whole lot because he did not work territories like most wrestlers did. He had such a phenomenal reputation that he just floated around and wrestled where he wanted to, and he picked and chose. I mean, he was such a star and such a big name that if he called you up and said, hey, can I come and work for you next week? Or 3 weeks from now, I'd give you a notice ahead of time so he could you could get him on the card. But, and that was kind of the way you got Lou. I mean, I wasn't expecting to have Lou in this tournament, and he calls me up and he says, I'd like to come down there, see what you're doing. And, wow, I got this tournament. And I go, wow, I'm going to slide you in here, man. Yeah. Heck yeah, you can come down, right?
Yeah.
Worked out great.
A former NWA champion trying to get into the tournament to face Harley Race and become again the NWA champion. So on a personal note, 1-to-1, face-to-face, what was he like with you? How did he treat you as a young man in the business?
You mean in the ring or
or both? Both.
As a known. In the ring, he treated me great. And the reason for that is I'm almost positive is because he wrestled my grandfather and he wrestled my father.
Wow.
Think about that. I'm the 3rd generation that he was in the ring with. And my grandfather was a tough old son of a gun. I know when he wrestled my granddad, he was pretty darn impressed. And my dad was no slouch either. So, wrestling-wise, he was. But what was really cool about him is on this night, there's a big crowd, and it's a big, beautiful building. And after the thing's all over, he says to me, he goes, Ron, he goes, how many did you have here? And he said, wow. He goes, how long have you been down here? I said, well, we started here in 1978. This is my 2nd year, 3rd year in the territory. This territory. I already been in Knoxville, and he knew that. He'd been to Knoxville many times.
Yeah.
So he asked me, and said, how long you been in this territory? And I said, 2 years, just a little over 2 years. And he says, wow, man. He goes, I don't see crowds like this. He says, this looks like a Houston crowd.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that was a tremendous compliment because a guy named Paul Bosch was the promoter in Houston and a former wrestler. And Houston had 10,000 every show.
Wow.
10,000. I mean, it's and he said, it reminds me of a Houston crowd. Yeah. I was like, wow. So
that's so cool. Remembering the great Thesz. How about attendances? This had to be really big in all three of those major cities in Southeast Alabama, South, and the South.
Yeah, well, the difference was here that this was the only tournament because it was lose-only shot. So Montgomery and Dothan are not going to get this tournament, okay? They're going to have different set of matches, right? The totally different card than what Mobile had because Mobile's the only one that's going to get the World Championship match. But like I said, Charlie mentioned that in the first part of the TV show that if you're in Montgomery or Dothan, you're welcome to come down to Mobile and see this tournament and to see the championship match. So what we were trying to do, Dave, is we were trying to get we had for years had this three major cities and tried to keep them separated, but we were reaching a point in which people were starting to drive now from Montgomery to Mobile because they've become such fans. From Dothan to Mobile, back and forth from these three cities, they would drive to the others because business had grown so dramatically. So we had so many more people coming to the matches, and it was because sometimes you were getting people from three cities. So Montgomery, the last match they had was at 2 cage matches. That was the week before. And this house dropped a little bit because their matches was not at cage matches this time. But it was a great card. It was good enough card to only drop just a small amount, But basically, their crowd went from 5,300 only down to 4,800. So Dothan dropped a little bit, too, because it didn't have the tournament. But it went from 54 down to 4,900. And Mobile held up very well, man. It dropped only about 100 people from 9,100 to 9,000. And so, Mobile hung in there really, really good because they got this tournament. And tournaments were really popular. I mean, I didn't mind booking tournaments at any time because they normally turned out to be really fan-favorite deals. So the total for all three of those cities combined was 18,700 fans.
All right. It's like we're always sitting under the learning tree when we enjoy these Studcasts. It's always just so cool to get this information and just be a part of history. All right. Speaking of the learning tree, we have one and we will have time this week. Let's get it in here. Bonnie Lancaster from Phoenix, Arizona asks, she says, I enjoyed your last Studcast about the difference in TV audience and attendance between Vince McMahon Jr. and all the rest of wrestling in 1985 before he tore it down. Those are my words, not hers. She says, what are your personal feelings about Vince McMahon Jr.? Stud, take your time.
boy. Dogs, man. I was expecting to get something about this.
Yeah.
So, Miss Lancaster of Phoenix, Arizona, I may hem and haw here a little bit because I have to control myself for this conversation. I used to live out there, Miss Lancaster in Phoenix. I went to Camelback High School, 1963. So that's a beautiful area out there. I love that part of the country. And my dad went out there in 1962 and was the first person to explode wrestling in the state of Arizona. People have been there many times and never was able to get it off the ground, and Dad managed to do that. So speaking of Vince, which I'm a little hesitant to do a lot of times, and especially with his present situation and things that are going on in his life right now. I feel like that wrestling was very unfortunate, I guess is a good way of putting it. to have Vince McMahon Jr. be the one that ended up with the national television and with all the clout, and ended up going the direction he went. If it had been somebody else, just maybe anybody else, they might have, if they got that television, and I had an opportunity myself to get it, but I didn't want to do it because I was afraid I would become in fear by the entire National Wrestling Alliance about what's he going to do with this national television program. But God knows if I had done it, when I look back, I think that would have been wonderful compared to what has happened because by Vince McMahon Jr. getting his hands on it. That would have been wonderful if I'd had the opportunity. I would have handled it a whole lot differently. But Vince is a very controversial figure. I think I said that earlier. Everybody knows that. He seems to me, I've never met Vince personally. I've met his father, and I really admired his father, Vince McMahon Sr. Great guy, tremendous wrestling promoter, came to every NWA meeting, was a member of the NWA for many, many years, and then wanted to run his own company and have his own champion and all that. And I understood why. He's in major markets of the Northeast up there, and I hate to hem and haw here for you, Miss Lancaster, but I don't have much good to say about Vince McMahon Jr. I do his father, and I just think it's a shame that somebody else couldn't have been his boy. His father's boy.
Yeah.
I wish that the wrong guy got in charge of things, and who would have ever figured that as strong as wrestling was for all those years from 1920s to the mid 1980s, then all of these different promoters and all of everybody's success they were having, that anybody could shut it down, that anybody would want to shut it down is one thing, but that anybody would have the ability to shut it down is another. And, if he hadn't had that national television on NBC, he wouldn't have been able to get to where he got. And so it's very unfortunate I can't tell you, Miss Lancaster, how many people it was the most unfortunate thing that ever happened in their lives. All the wrestlers that were wrestling in the mid 80s, all the referees, just about all of them. Vince took a few of them, but not very many. All the promoters, all of those guys had to walk away from the sport. And wow, that's heartbreaking. It's mind-boggling how much they all suffered because of one man.
Wow. It makes me wonder what it would be like to be a fly on the wall between Vince Sr. and Jr., because you said Sr. was one that he played the game. He went to the NWA meetings in Las Vegas. You knew him. He was a stand-up guy. And then there's Vince. So it makes me wonder what the conversations between those two were about.
Oh, yeah.
If Sr. was fighting Jr. to stop, don't tear up the territories, that kind of thing. I don't know. That's amazing, and that's a story that may never be told. All right, Stud, another great one this week. Where do we ride next week?
Well, we're going to be doing that hidden history lesson that I didn't get to today. The one that I planned on that got postponed here, basically because I had these two guys that had so much great facts, and they presented them to me, and I wanted to finish up with my feelings about what could have happened for wrestling and how much better things were than people realize, and how much worse they are now than people realize. And so I'm going to cover the part of professional wrestling history that's going to take us back next week to the early 1900s. And I'm going to discuss what most people have no idea about at all, is the tremendous relationship that developed between wrestlers and carnivals around the country back in those days. Why that happened, how that happened. And my grandfather told me this story that I'm going to tell next week when I was 12 years old. And I'll never forget him explaining to me what it was like to wrestle on the valley in these carnivals out west. It's pretty amazing.
Wow.
And then we're going to find out about the fantastic card in Mobile's 10,000-seat main arena, man. Me against Harley Race for the NWA World Championship. That one's going to be next week. We'll be talking about that match, and we'll talk about 3 other title matches on that same card. And one of them is going to be an I Quit match for the Southeastern Championship between Joe Leduc and the Mongolian Stomper. And that type of match, the match goes until one of them is going to take the microphone and say, I quit. And oh my goodness, I have no, wow, talking about these two. Who's going to do that? I can't see either one of those two guys, so we're going to talk about that match next week. And, and I want to thank everybody, obviously, man, for all we do.
Good deal. All right. You have exposed Vince McMahon Jr. for who he really is, a greedy man willing to toss thousands of people in his same business under the bus to save a few bucks. I will now give you an opportunity to apologize if you like, Stud.
I think it's too late to apologize.
All right. Undoubtedly, the people at Google believed someone at his business that it was much larger than it really was in every way. So I think you may have made history in the last 2 Studcast, Ron. No doubt about it. That's been a lot of fun. Hey, folks, you know the deal on Facebook. Find Ron at Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud. Ron Fuller Welch, the Tennessee Stud. Like and follow him there and automatically become friends with a living legend. The same thing on Twitter, now known as X. Ron Fuller Welch. Follow him there, too. Everything that happens on Twitter also happens on Facebook. So whichever one you keep up with, that works. Listen, check out the fantastic website, tnstud.com. tnstud.com. This Studcast is going to be there. This one that we're doing right now is going to be there. Every Studcast ever done. Shop the Stud Store where you can get 43 super Studcasts, 4 different 8x10 photos, the thrilling lion novel called Brutus, personally autographed to you, and T-shirts still on sale, only $15.99, all with free shipping. Subscribe now at YouTube, Southeastern Rewind. Get the best in old school wrestling. Find 397 videos. The last 115 Studcasts, 52 Stud Stories, 102 Short Rides with the Stud, and now 14 Ask the Stud question and answer shows. All of this exclusively on YouTube, Southeastern Rewind. It is the best deal in old school wrestling. Any final comments, Stud?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for making Studcast, man. At this point, one of the most listened to in the world. I really, really appreciate it. I want to offer this special thanks to Mr. Areens and Mr. Harder for their helpful information that I was able to use during this broadcast. And please take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC. Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.